A Nigerian flight attendant saves an old Korean woman midair, unaware that an act of courage will ignite a love story, shake powerful secrets, and challenge everything she thought she knew about her past. What begins in the sky leads to a whirlwind of emotion, danger, and destiny. Sit tight. This story will steal your breath and touch your heart. Once upon a time, in the bright city of Lagos, Nigeria, there lived a young woman named Happiness. She was kind, brave, and always ready to help others. Happiness worked as a flight attendant and loved her job because it allowed her to meet people from all over the world. One day, she was assigned to a flight from Lagos to Seoul, South Korea. She was excited because she had never been to Korea before. As the plane soared through the sky, Happiness walked down the aisles, checking on passengers and making sure everyone was comfortable. She noticed an elderly Korean lady sitting alone, looking nervous. Happiness smiled warmly and asked, "Are you okay, Mom?" The old lady nodded, but clutched her chest suddenly, gasping for air. Happiness quickly called for help and used her training to assist the woman. She found the lady's medication in her bag and helped her take it. Soon, the old lady's breathing eased, and she smiled gratefully at Happiness. Unbeknownst to Happiness, a man named Min Jun was watching from his seat. He was the CEO of a big company in Seoul and was known for being cold and serious. But when he saw Happiness's kindness, something changed in his heart. He was touched by her compassion and couldn't stop thinking about her. After the plane landed in Seoul, Min Jun approached Happiness and thanked her for helping the old lady. He offered her his business card and said, "If you ever need anything in Korea, please contact me." Happiness smiled and took the card, not thinking much of it. In the following days, Min Jun couldn't get Happiness out of his mind. He found her number through his contacts and called her, inviting her to dinner. Happiness was surprised, but agreed. At dinner, they talked about their lives, dreams, and cultures. Min Jun was fascinated by Happiness's stories and her positive outlook on life. He realized he was falling in love with her. However, not everyone was happy about their growing relationship. Min Jun's family expected him to marry someone from a wealthy Korean family. They disapproved of Happiness, calling her an outsider. Min Jun was torn between his family's expectations and his feelings for Happiness. Happiness, too, faced challenges. She felt out of place in a foreign country and was unsure if she belonged in Min Jun's world. Despite the obstacles, their bond grew stronger. They supported each other through tough times and celebrated happy moments together. Happiness introduced Min Jun to Nigerian culture, teaching him about her traditions and favorite foods. Min Jun showed Happiness the beauty of Korea, taking her to historical sites and sharing his language with her. One day, Min Jun took Happiness to a quiet garden and said, "I don't care what others think. I love you, and I want to be with you." Happiness smiled, tears in her eyes, and replied, "I love you too." Their love story became an inspiration to many, showing that love knows no boundaries and that kindness can change even the coldest hearts. Min Jun and Happiness began spending more time together in Seoul. They visited small villages, walked through flower fields, and even danced under the streetlights when it rained. Everywhere they went, Min Jun's cold heart melted a little more. He laughed more, smiled more, and even sang songs in broken English and Yoruba just to make Happiness laugh. But not everyone in Korea smiled at their love. At his office, some of Min Jun's workers whispered behind his back, "She's not from here. She can't be the CEO's girlfriend." Even his assistant, Ji Hoon, who had served him for years, gave Happiness cold stares. One morning, Min Jun's mother, Madame Su Min, visited him at his company. She wore a hanbok and had her usual proud, stiff walk. She walked into Min Jun's office and placed a picture on his desk. It was of a Korean woman named Yoon Ha. "She is the daughter of a minister," Madame Su Min said. "She is beautiful, polite, from a rich family, and Korean." Min Jun stayed quiet. "She's not the one I love," he finally said. "She saved a life, mother, and she saved my heart too." But Su Min didn't smile. She said coldly, "If you choose her, you will be cut off. No more family, no more inheritance." Min Jun didn't answer. He looked out the window, his heart heavy. Meanwhile, Happiness had her worries. She missed Nigeria, the spicy jollof rice, the laughter of her cousins, and the sound of Yoruba drums in the evening. Though Min Jun made her feel special, Seoul sometimes made her feel invisible. She saw the stares, the fake smiles, the whispers in Korean she couldn't understand. It made her wonder, do I belong here? One evening, Min Jun surprised her. He had cooked Nigerian food using recipes he found online, though it was a bit burnt. He had also printed little Nigerian flags and pasted them around his kitchen. Then he knelt and said, "This world can be cruel, but with you, I feel brave. I don't want a life that makes sense to others. I want a life with you." Tears rolled down Happiness's face. But just before she could answer, her phone rang. It was the old Korean lady she had helped on the plane. Her voice was shaky. "Please, child, I need to see you. It's important." Something about her voice made Happiness tremble. Was something wrong? Why now? And what secret was she hiding? Happiness quickly took a taxi to the old lady's house. It was in a quiet neighborhood in Seoul, with cherry blossom trees lining the street. The house was small, but filled with warmth. The moment she stepped inside, the old lady, whose name was Mrs. Hye-jin, held her hand tightly. "My child," she said softly, "you don't know who I am, but I know who you are." Happiness blinked, confused. "You saved my life on that plane. But that was not just an accident. That was fate." Mrs. Hye-jin slowly walked to a dusty drawer and pulled out an old photo. It was black and white, showing a young Korean man and a beautiful Nigerian woman standing side by side in front of an airport. "That man," Mrs. Hye-jin said, pointing, "is my brother. And the woman. She was your grandmother." Happiness's eyes widened. "What? But I don't understand." "Many years ago," Mrs. Hye-jin said, her voice trembling, "my brother was a Korean pilot. He met a Nigerian nurse during a medical flight. They fell in love. But the world was not ready for them. They were forced apart." Happiness felt like the air had left the room. Her grandmother had never told her this story. She only said she once knew someone who could fly. "My brother died heartbroken," Hye-jin whispered. "But I never forgot. When I saw you, something in my heart knew. You looked just like her. You were meant to be here. This is your second home." Happiness sat in silence, her heart pounding. Suddenly, all the rejection, the whispers, the loneliness in Korea felt different. Maybe she wasn't an outsider. Maybe she was a thread in a story that had started long ago. Just as the room grew quiet, Mrs. Hye-jin reached for her chest again. She collapsed. "No, Halmione!" Happiness shouted, calling for help. She dialed the emergency number and tried to keep her calm, just like she had on the plane. Paramedics came quickly and took Mrs. Hye-jin to the hospital. Happiness rode with her, holding her hand tightly. At the hospital, the doctors said she had a weak heart and she needed surgery soon. But she refused. "I've lived long enough," she said. I only wanted to tell the truth before I go. I wanted to give you something. She handed Happiness a small gold box. Inside was a necklace with a tiny Korean charm and a letter, written in Yoruba. Happiness read the first line, and tears filled her eyes. It was from her grandmother. "My dearest child," it said, "if this letter finds you, it means love has found you too." But before she could finish reading, Min-jun rushed into the hospital, breathless. He had been searching for her everywhere. "Happiness!" he cried, running to her side. And behind him was his mother. Madame Su-min stood frozen as she saw the woman lying on the hospital bed. Tears welled in her eyes. "Eoni?" she whispered. It was the first time she spoke in a voice that trembled. Mrs. Hyejin smiled faintly. "Yes, it's me." And just like that, secrets that had been buried for decades began to rise to the surface. The hospital room went silent. Happiness looked from Madame Su-min to Mrs. Hyejin. Her heart beat fast. What was going on? "You know her?" Happiness asked. Min-jun looked confused too. Su-min stepped closer, slowly, like her feet were heavy with years of regret. "She is my sister," Su-min whispered. "My elder sister. We haven't spoken in over 30 years." Min-jun gasped. "Oma, why?" Mrs. Hyejin smiled weakly. "Because I chose love over family tradition," she said. "I fell in love with a Nigerian man. Our family hated it. Su-min turned away from me." Su-min's face turned red and her lips trembled. "I was young. I was scared. Our father said if I ever spoke to you again, I would be disowned too. I didn't have your strength, Eoni." The two sisters stared at each other, years of pain between them. Then, Su-min dropped to her knees beside the hospital bed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, crying. "I'm so sorry." Mrs. Hyejin reached out with her thin fingers and gently touched her sister's face. "I forgive you," she said. "Love should never be punished." Happiness watched with tears in her eyes. Min-jun took her hand and squeezed it. In that moment, the past felt like it was being healed. But something else stirred in Happiness. She still held the letter in her other hand. The one written in Yoruba is from her grandmother. She wanted to read it in peace. She wanted to understand everything. Later that night, after Mrs. Hyejin had been moved to a quiet room, Happiness sat in a small garden behind the hospital. Min-jun sat beside her. She opened the letter and continued reading. "They told us we didn't belong. They called our love strange, but the skies didn't care. The clouds smiled down on us. And when he had to leave, he promised to find me again in another lifetime. If you are reading this, my love is alive in you." Happiness clutched the letter to her chest. Everything was starting to make sense. Her soul had always felt drawn to the skies. Now she knew why. Her blood carried the story of two dreamers from two different lands. Min-jun looked at her with wonder in his eyes. "You are more Korean than anyone I know," he whispered, "and more Nigerian than anyone can handle." They both laughed. But just as they were about to kiss, Min-jun's phone rang. He answered. His face turned pale. "What is it?" Happiness asked. "It's the board," he said. "They found out I've been dating you, and they're planning to remove me as CEO." Happiness's smile faded. Again, the world was trying to pull them apart. But this time, she wasn't just some girl on a plane. She was a legacy, a fighter. She stood up and said, "Let them try." The next morning, the sun rose softly over Seoul. But for Min-jun and Happiness, the day felt like a storm waiting to happen. The board meeting was set for 10 a.m. Min-jun, dressed in a black suit, stood in front of the mirror with heavy eyes. Happiness walked up behind him and straightened his tie. He looked at her through the mirror. "I don't want to lose everything I've worked for." Happiness smiled gently. "Then let's not let them take it from you." He blinked. "What do you mean?" She held up her phone. "I have a plan." When they arrived at the company's towering building, cameras were already flashing. News had leaked. Cold CEO's mystery girlfriend is a Nigerian flight attendant. The media buzzed with gossip and judgment. Inside the boardroom, the mood was colder than ever. 12 members sat stiffly, eyes sharp and lips tight. Chairman Bayek, an older man with silver hair, looked at Min Jun and said, "Your recent decisions have made us question your leadership. This relationship is causing scandal." Before Min Jun could speak, Happiness stood up. Every eye turned to her. Some sneered. Others looked shocked she even dared to speak. She pulled a small projector from her bag and connected it. The screen lit up with a video. It was footage from the plane. The moment she saved Mrs. Hae-jin's life. Her calm voice. Her bravery. The way she took control, saving a woman no one else had helped. Then she played another video. A short interview Mrs. Hae-jin had recorded the night before, in the hospital. "I was saved by this young woman," she said. "She is kind, strong, and a symbol of what the world needs. Unity, courage, and love. And by the way, she is also my niece." Gasps filled the room. Chairman Bayek's jaw dropped. One of the women on the board covered her mouth in shock. Happiness stepped forward. "I may not be Korean by blood, but my story is tied to this country. My grandmother loved a man from here. That love cost her everything. But now, I refuse to be silent. If you believe love makes a man unfit to lead, then maybe it is this board that has lost its way." The room went silent. Min Jun slowly stood up, shoulders straight. "If I have to choose between this company and the woman who taught me how to live again, I choose her." The room erupted into whispers. Then Chairman Bayek raised a hand. "We'll vote." One by one, hands were raised. At first, only 2 hands went up to support Min Jun, then 3, then 4, 5. Finally, 8 out of 12. He had won, but barely. After the meeting, Min Jun held Happiness close. "You were fire," he whispered. "I almost cried," she joked, wiping a tear. But even as they smiled, outside the building, a man in a black coat watched them from a car. He dialed a number. "She's stronger than expected," he said. "But I've found her weakness." "Do it quietly," the voice on the phone replied. "No one must know where she came from, or who she really is." That night, Seoul glittered with lights, but in Min Jun's apartment, the mood was quiet. Happiness stood on the balcony, staring at the city skyline. Her heart should have been full. She had faced the board, defended her love, and helped 2 sisters reunite. But something didn't feel right. Min Jun joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm happy," she said softly. "But something is off." As if her words summoned it, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think you know your story? You know nothing. Come to the old airfield in Gwangju tomorrow. Come alone, or secrets die with the past." Happiness's fingers tightened around the phone. Min Jun noticed the change in her face. "What is it?" She thought for a moment, then lied. "Just a message from a friend back home." She didn't want to worry him. Not yet. The next morning, she left before dawn, taking a train to Gwangju. The old airfield sat on the edge of town, abandoned and covered in weeds. The wind whistled through the broken windows, and crows circled above. She waited. After a few minutes, a man in a grey suit walked out from one of the hangars. He was Korean, tall and sharp-eyed. "You're braver than I thought," he said. Happiness narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" He stepped closer. "Your grandmother, the Nigerian nurse. She didn't just fall in love with a pilot. She uncovered something the government tried to hide." Happiness's heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" She found documents, evidence of illegal experiments on international workers in the 1960s. Your grandfather tried to stop it, but when they threatened her, he sent her away, told her to forget everything. The man threw a brown folder at her feet. "These secrets were buried. Until you showed up." "Why tell me now?" she asked. He leaned in, his voice cold. "Because some people still want those secrets buried. If you keep digging, you'll end up just like them." Then he walked away, disappearing into the fog. Happiness picked up the folder with shaking hands. Inside were pictures, documents in both English and Korean. One photo showed her grandmother holding a newborn. On the back, in Yoruba, was written, "She carries two worlds in her heart, one of fire, one of truth." She pressed the folder to her chest, her breath heavy. Back in Seoul, Minjun searched for her everywhere. He found her note. "I had to go. I'll be back, I promise." But hours passed. Then a full day. Still no word. He stood in his office, fists clenched. "She's in danger." Behind him, his assistant Ji-hoon appeared quietly. "I think I know where she went," Ji-hoon said. "I'll take you there." Minjun turned sharply. "Why would you help?" Ji-hoon's face was unreadable. "Because I think there's something about her we all need to know." Meanwhile, in Gwangju, someone was following Happiness. She didn't see him yet, but he was there, and he wasn't the only one. The rain fell gently over Gwangju as Happiness walked through the quiet alleyways, the folder clutched tightly in her arms. Her heart was heavy, with truth, with fear, with a longing to be safe again. She didn't know someone was watching her, not the man who wanted to silence her. But Min Jun. He had arrived just moments ago, led by Ji-hoon. The second he spotted her soaked in rain, walking alone, something inside him shattered. He ran. "Happiness!" She stopped, turned. Her eyes widened. He ran to her, breathless. She didn't say a word. She dropped the folder and ran too, into his arms. The folder burst open on the wet ground, documents flying in the wind. But none of that mattered in that moment. "I was so scared," she whispered against his chest. "You found me." "Of course I found you," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I'll always find you." They stood like that in the rain, like a scene from a movie. Two souls that had crossed oceans, cultures, pain, and the weight of history. Minjun gently took her face in his hands. "I don't care about what they say, or the company, or the past. You are the only future I want." Happiness blinked through her tears, her smile trembling. "You sure you can handle this much, Nigerian love?" He laughed. "I can try, but maybe you should teach me forever?" She froze. "Wait, are you—" He pulled a small ring from his jacket pocket. Even soaked in rain, it sparkled like magic. "It's not big, it's not fancy, but it's real, like you and me." She stared at him, lips trembling. "Ask me." He dropped to one knee in the rain. "Happiness, will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears. "Are you kidding me?" "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." He stood and lifted her into his arms. The rain poured. The people around them clapped, cheered, and took photos. But they didn't hear any of it, only their hearts, beating as one. Later that month, in a quiet garden filled with cherry blossoms and traditional Nigerian fabrics, the wedding was held. Mrs. Hyejin walked Happiness down the aisle, proud and smiling. Sumin cried through the whole thing. Ji-hoon danced awkwardly with Nigerian guests. Even Chairman Bayek sent a gift and a letter. Sometimes, love is the only legacy worth protecting. As the sun set, Min-jun whispered into Happiness's ear, "You didn't just save my mother. You saved me." And she smiled. Guess that flight wasn't so ordinary after all. They laughed, they kissed, and their love, once born in the clouds, finally touched the stars. Drop one word for Happiness and Min-jun in the comment section. If you found this story interesting, please like, share it with your loved ones, and subscribe for more amazing tales.